the 25th Annual Watershed Environmental Poetry Festival, the pandemic edition. This is the closing event, the celebratory closing event for this wonderful Watershed weekend, all virtual. And it's like I said, the closing wonderful event. I'd like to thank the Watershed Committee, the Ecology Center, Berkeley Farmers Market, Pegasus Books in Berkeley, and all sorts of people, Chris Olender, Kirk Lumpkin, the Berkeley Civic Arts Commission, Poets and Writers Readings and Workshops. I just really thank you all for helping us keep Poetry Flash and the Watershed alive. And thanks to our Watershed keepers. Our tech support is Brett Benson, and he's wonderful. And thank you. And we are, let's see what else to tell you. We've made a gorgeous broadside of an exquisite and very meaningful in these times of thinking about climate change and our earth and what we can do to help. Poem broadside. It's hand printed by Lisa Rappaport at Literal Press, and you can find info about that on poetryflash.org. Go to our Watershed page. There's if I already said this, please forgive me, but there's a Watershed online bookshop, bookshop.org/shop/watershed. And you will find there books by all of our readers. And that is courtesy of Pegasus Books. They are wonderful. Shop there in Berkeley. And I just want to say that we're going to show a photo montage, 25 years of writers, nature, and community. The photographs are by Stephen C. Wilson. The music is by Ken Waldman, Alaska's fiddling poet. It's an original arrangement with original compositions by Ken and Lizzie Thompson. And then there's also a traditional tune stuck in the middle. And this is all to celebrate 25 years of Watershed, co-founded by one of our extremely esteemed readers today, Robert Hass, and Mark Baldridge of Poetry Flash. So let's get started.
We're so happy to have you all here. Our first reader for the day will be Lucille Lang, and she is really an extraordinary woman of letters. For one thing, she's a publisher, Scarlett Tanager Press, and she's published poetry. She's published 2 anthologies, one of which, Fire and Rain, Echo Poetry of California, was celebrated last year and is included with her new book in our bookshop this year. And her new book is Birds of San Pancho and Other Poems of Place. And she travels the world so vividly in this book. She looks at creatures, she looks at people, and she sees them. She delivers you to them. So let's give her a warm welcome, Lucille Lang.
Birds of San Pancho. A great kiskadee sits on the casa wall, belting its exuberant song above the dusty cobblestone street. The bird is masked like a raccoon, its breast yellow as the butterflies that flit amid hibiscus and bougainvillea. Far from the casa, where palms and maya nut trees grow lushly, a yellow-winged cacique waits in the paperbark tree, the lemony underside of its long tail cascading like silk. It surveys the scene, ignoring the yellow-cheeked woodpecker, streak-backed oriole, flycatchers, and scrub euphonia sharing the salva. Farther down the road, where red ants live inside acacia thorns, a pale cow wanders alone, snubbing the fat chachalacas, singing chachalaca as I pass by. It seems the birds are out to cheer me, though I know food and mates are what they're after. A whole flock of orange-fronted parakeets feasts on berries overhead. Later at the lagoon, a great blue heron, a little blue heron, a green heron, a night heron, 2 great egrets, 8 snowy egrets, and 20 cattle egrets gather while brown pelicans dive for fish and the sun's bright disk sinks into the sea. When it disappears, the egrets rise in groups and pairs to settle into coconut palms for the night. Oh, to sit up there too, safe, having eaten my fill, with folded wings, watching over creation. And the next poem is called Birthday Gifts from the Rainforest, and this takes place in Arenal, Costa Rica. A howler monkey dining in a cecropia tree, a trogon dressed in yellow, blue, and green, his dowdier mate, the blood tree oozing red sap, a river of leafcutter ants carrying bits of leaves much bigger than their bodies to their nest, antbirds and wrens chattering and flapping, a pygmy squirrel hunched on a branch, heliconias with leaves like orange beaks, sleepy hibiscus whose pistils stick out from pink buds that never open, whiptail lizards rushing every which way across the path, rattlesnake plants shaking spiky yellow blossom stalks like beads, a baby viper curled on a leaf, monkey tail ferns and elephant ear plants, rufous-tailed hummingbirds savoring purple blossoms of porterweed. A palm whose above-ground roots look like huge penises. All the creatures looking down at me, twice as old as I'd like to be, but not yet done with wonder. And now I'll read a couple of poems from the Galapagos Islands. The first one is called What the Tortoises Know. On Henavesa, as my husband lay, on the beach of Darwin Bay, a sea lion came to sniff his toes, and a red-footed booby sitting with her chick in a mangrove nearby let me get kissing close. On North Seymour, the frigate birds weren't fazed by me, and a young blue-footed booby was intrigued by my walking stick. On Espanola, the sand was so thick with iguanas, it was hard not to step on them. The guide explained that the animals here don't fear us, hawks and short-eared owls being the only predators evolution has bred them to know. They first saw humans with guns and bows just 500 years ago. But giant tortoises, who live to be 150 years old, have seen how we kill to make boxes and combs. So heads and legs withdraw into shells at the sound of a loud voice, and they grow still as clean-picked bones. And the next one is called Global Warming in the Galapagos. 3 years without rain, and incense trees are gray, leafless in what should be the wet season. Without the trees, where will red-footed boobies with blue beaks build nests where fluffy chicks can hatch? Even prickly pear cacti looking so much like clusters of spiny ping-pong paddles are turning brown and dying. What will happen to iguanas that eat the cacti and lava lizards that nibble lice from the iguanas' necks and backs? A warming sea also brings El Nino, with too much rain, flooding overheated currents where penguins can't find fish, and beaches so hot that green turtle eggs can't hatch. When iguanas can no longer regulate their body temperature, giant tortoises and blue-footed boobies will gather like refugees and strike out for cooler land. Now I'm going to move ahead to the second section of the book, Between the Two Shining Seas, and read a few poems that take place here in the US. The first one is called At Lake Tahoe. Granite mountains, dense with white firs, lodgepole pines, and ponderosas, rise abruptly from the lake's blue bowl, so deep its waters could cover all of California and Nevada. The Washos, who lived here 10,000 summers, named it Lake in the Sky because it reflected clouds, sunset, and stars. They caught Lahontan trout in the lake, mountain whitefish in icy streams. On the other side of the continent, my Wampanoag ancestors were gathering cranberries, covering their summer homes with cattail mats, baking clams, drying corn, and fishing for salmon off Cape Cod. The Washos used only fallen trees for homes they would dismantle before leaving Lake in the Sky each winter. In fall, they gathered pinyon pine nuts to eat until spring. This was before white people came and cut down the pinyon pines to build their houses, dynamited the mountains in search of silver and gold, and claimed the fish. Now, a paddle boat with 3 decks takes tourists on cruises of Lake Tahoe. Yet in summer, Washos still do the pine nut dance, and Wampanoags do the grass dance to keep the world in balance and remind us that the earth is living. Every rock is sacred, and every tree and salmon has a soul. And the next poem is called Red Rock Canyon. Low shrubs, creosote and black brush, grayish, close to the ground as stones, yucca with fans of spiky leaves, junipers with blue berries and brownish yellow clusters of mistletoe, prints on a rock, 5 Paiute hands 1,000 years old, scorpions 5 inches long, all this in the desert 15 miles west of the Las Vegas Strip, with its replicas of the Eiffel Tower, the Rialto Bridge, and the Roman Forum, and all the bells, lights, and whistles of the casinos. But even the $40 million fountains with 1,200 jets shooting water 500 feet into the air, choreographed to music, don't excite me as much as Joshua trees twisted and gnarled into odd shapes, and broad vistas where mountains, striped red, yellow, and tan, reach toward the sun. And I'm just going to read 2 more poems, and both of these take place here in California. The first one is a sonnet. It takes place at Clear Lake, and it's called Watching the Grebes. A taut blue sky is stretched above the lake, which glitters like a rippling field of stars in early sun. 2 western grebes take a morning swim, but they don't go far before they plunge. When they emerge, beaks filled with weeds, they stand. It's time to dance. Long necks held high, black chest crests and white cheeks side by side. They glide as though on skis, advance toward us. Standing on the balcony, we see the shining wake they leave behind. My love, I'd like to be as easy as the grebes, who seem content to find a dancing partner as the new day starts, a dark-winged bird that knows the steps by heart. And my last poem is called I Am Amazed, and it's dedicated to Berkeley Art Ambassador Susan Duhan Felix. I am amazed by the Arches cluster, the most crowded place in the Milky Way, jam-packed with stars 25,000 light years from Earth in Sagittarius. By Earth, whirling through space, the only planet known to have free oxygen, liquid water, whales, wallabies, and redwood forests. By a single redwood tree, 350 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter, standing above the Pacific since Herod was exiled to Gaul. By a single redwood needle, flat with 2 silvery bands on its underside and inner machinery endlessly churning out ATP. By a molecule of ATP, which carries energy in all the cells of people and trees, a currency required for love and breathing. By 2 children, a boy and a girl playing under the tree, who spot a speckled woodpecker with a red patch on its head, tapping the bark, igniting a blaze of amazement. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. I was doing a little grebe dance in my chair as I listened to you. Thank you so much. Our next reader is Kristen George Bagdanov, and she has two new books published pretty much simultaneously. One of them is called Diurne, Diurne, and the other Fossils in the Making, both of which should, I'm sure, be in our bookshop. And Diurne has a superficial relationship to Ludwig Wittgenstein's Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. I'm sure a deep favorite among many of our readers. In Diurne, the poems are numbered rather than titled, and they move in discrete items of prose poetry. quite apart from Ludwig, some of those entries are like, everyone is waiting for this poem to turn. And one particularly beautiful or fascinating entry is telling us that the speaker is practicing an impersonal intimacy. An impersonal intimacy. Now, her second book, Fossils in the Making, is more obviously lyrical. It has a kind of a stormy turbulence. And she is really an extraordinary poet, a rigorously intellectual poet who holds a kind of a jeweler's lens up to the world and to ourselves. So let's give her a warm welcome, Kristen George Bagdanov.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I will just quickly plug the books because I'm actually not going to read from either of them today. Given the impersonal intimacy of Zoom, I've decided I'm going to do a little show and tell by reading some of the poetry objects I've been making since the pandemic began. So using my obscure and amateur skills in origami and collage, this past year I've been making poems instead of just writing them. And this was prompted by, of course, the distance that we all had to take from one another. I really wanted to just mail my poems to people as objects that could stand in for my presence. If you want one, I'll send you one for free. Just go to my website and send me an email. They've been fun and playful ways to think about form and poetry and touch in this very unconventional year apart. So the first one, and I'll just sort of read them and then, show and tell up to the lens. So this first poem zine, as I call them, is all about breath, and it's called Breathe. Breath thickens into atmosphere, and we call it growth. As if the snake only swallows the rat to embrace it more wholly, and the lungs inflate by will, not need. As if emerge were a way to leave the cave without carving another. It shape a sound no mouth can make. So this is a little blow up poem. So if I send this to you, it can become a container for your breath. We're supposed to keep our breath to ourselves. So I feel like this could be just a nice way to cherish your own breath. And then there's also a little poem written inside if you really want to hold the jeweler's lens, as Richard said, up to the poem. So this next poem is just sort of in like a mini booklet form. Some you might be familiar with if you play with scenes. And it's called Indicator Species. And I was thinking a lot about how animals, in ancient times were omens that we literally read the birds to understand the future, right? And oftentimes birds or other, animals like bees are thought of as indicators of what harm is going to befall humans, and how that seems like a problematic relationship to sort of read our future through animal bodies. So this is called Indicator Species. Another bee sick on the sill, heaving then still. The world convulses, no hive to call it home. There must be something in the air, something in the water, some new element that can bend word into being, wing out of need. Some sign that means more than a warning. And so you can see here, there's I'll just show this up, just some little collage I was thinking a lot about the curve of, flatten the curve and things like that. Now, am I on the big screen, by the way? Because Richard, you're on my big speaker view screen. So I don't know, maybe you want to mute yourself and then it might change. It might just be my view, but just in case.
Your view.
Okay. So this next poem is called Crude Futures, and I wrote it after crude oil had a negative value back in April. And I thought, what a world. That would be great if we could keep that up, having a negative value. So it's called Crude Futures, and you'll see it's a sort of a strange accordion fold, which I'll show you after I read. Oh, thanks, Brett. Okay. Oil, a future that has lost its value in a world who fractures from too much touch. Creatures long dead sheen the surface. They knew, they know, in the well that was once their bone, how this all already ends. So this poem is meant to be played with. So you can see there's these little flaps that stick out, and writing the poem in this form caused me to rewrite the poem because I wanted it to be read vertically and horizontally. So you can read this poem probably about, 8 different ways. So it's sort of a fun, playful object, thinking about what my other book talks about, fossils in the making. So thinking about these ancient bodies being the organic compost that turns into fossil fuels that we then burn. And sometimes I think about emissions as being like the ghostly past haunting us, or maybe that's just me. So I was trying to think about that kind of deep time and deep future of fossils and fossil fuels. Okay, these last couple poems are part of a project that I started doing over the summer with the poet Margaret Rhonda. And she had already been independently writing poems about correspondence. And so we decided to exchange and respond to each other's poetry through the mail. And so I'll start by reading a poem by her, and then I'll read the response that I sent to her. So this is by Margaret Rhonda. Dear friend, I was thinking about a study that examined a series of shapes: human musculature, sexual positions, the layout of an internment camp. How is structure different from form? And who is we with its ugly faces? Form is a man's selfies in 1,000 window displays and shards of sidewalk glass appearing again and again. A border is a structure. Sometimes I was writing, sometimes I stared out windows. Sometimes there were tree shadows on white blinds or roses etched on a lampshade. I followed the patterns with my eyes, but all I saw were prisons. If you take everything out of the day, there's still a spine to it, a shape like a broken rib. I was copying down others' words. How's a thing held? Then I was thinking about a letter to you that would contain every shape, everything closed and open. Such a beautiful poem. There's so much to respond to, but I was really struck by the idea of the day having a spine. And even, these days where everything just sort of feels drained out of it, but there's still the creases and the shape that remains. And so when thinking about what poem I would make to send to her, I made this little object that sort of folds in on itself, and it's reminiscent of a note you might pass to a friend. And it's the type of thing that really controls how fast you can read it by how you unfold it. So I'll go ahead and read this. The first line refers to, in origami, there are folds called valley and mountain. And I like thinking of the idea of trying to fold the paper to be the thing itself. This doesn't have a title. I'll title it Dear Friend. Was it mountain, valley, or valley, mountain? Each fold wanting to be the likeness of something more than itself. Always keeping some part of its nature concealed. You say the spine stays even after the day is drained. Here is its shape. You can make it with your hands over and over again. And it just folds up on itself. So this has been a really fun project, and I'll close by reading a poem object that I just sent back to Margaret, to which she's going to respond. And so it's this very long, thin, I was playing with long lines and the pace of a line in a poem, and how this sort of forces you to slow down from line to line. And I'm only realizing now that it actually also responds to one of the lines in Margaret's poems, which asks, how's a thing held? And we think about words as holding things for us, especially in this time where, you know, we can't hold a lot of the people that we are accustomed to holding. So holding our words and words holding us, something I've been thinking about a lot. And I wrote this reflecting upon that month and a half during the summer where if you lived in Northern California, you couldn't go outside really, but you also couldn't really be inside with people due to the wildfires. And just, you know, what a dark time that was, and what a difficult time that was in the way that we thought about our breath in the air, and this intersection of the pandemic and climate crisis. Hold. We held our breath. Whole days went by and we did not go outside. Smoke is a smell that has never been nostalgic. Days stacked into weeks, and those of us who lived inside tried to purify our bodies, personify our things. Air, another commodity to be securitized. The hum of the machine so natural, I can no longer sleep without it. A mask to cover my lover's labored breathing. Weeks dissolved into months, and those of us who were sheltered remarked upon the thickness of ash covering our cars and patio furniture. We took pictures and shared them and worried over our animals' lungs when we took them outside for their evening walk. Touch was a dream that spoiled into nightmare. Feast of the dead that seems to the hero wet glistening while the audience gags at plates piled high with larvae. Do you remember the day the wind stopped? And the particles that were once bed, book, and animal, both wild and housed, settled, and we who were inside poked out our heads to sniff the air and confirm what our apps were telling us. The vows I made then, I swear I meant them and still do. The awe of my lungs, which recomposed the atmosphere and it me. The belief that when I hold my breath, the story shifts. The night in August, when I watched through my screen as flame caressed the condor's nest, the stream sputtering in and out, the chick chirping. When it cut to black, I gasped. Weeks went by without word. I kept checking the feeds, but they were filled with more urgent sorrows, people and houses and utility. I held my breath, holding it like a living, breathing thing. I felt it slip away one night to feed the hungry air. I heard the mouth open. I wanted it to speak. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. It's a shame we can't zoom those objects, send them like paper airplanes to people, but let me encourage you to look at her books. Her two books are there for your delectation in the bookshop, and they should be read. Okay, our next reader is Craig Santos Perez, and we've got here his newest book. I believe it's his fifth book, Habitat Threshold. And Craig is an indigenous Chamorro from Guam, and his birthplace gave him a kind of a front row seat on American colonialism, which he has written about pretty fiercely. Now, this new book is a kind of a complete echo poetics. It's fierce. It covers everything from scarcity, war, refugees, climate change itself, pollution. It's all there. It's really vivid. And what's more, he's a poet. The man can blow, as you'll hear. So let's give him a warm welcome, Craig Santos Perez.
Well, Hafaday, aloha. Thank you so much, Richard, for that introduction. Thank you to everyone at Poetry Flash for organizing this event. I attended my first Watershed back in 2001, and since then it's inspired me ever since, and definitely formed part of my motivation to write this new book, which I'm going to read from today. This first poem, and I should also say I live in Hawaii now, and I lived in California for 15 years. All these poems take place in Hawaii, but they make connections to California, as you'll see. This first poem is called Rings of Fire. We host our daughter's first birthday party during the hottest April in history. Outside, my dad
He's frozen.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me? It's Brett.
Yes.
Maybe turn off your video and let's try just audio, because we were definitely missing you there for a second.
Okay. All right. Can you hear me now?
Totally. Let's hear your great stuff.
Okay, I think I lost you again. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. You're coming in and out. Can you hear us? Great. Craig, can you hear me?
Okay, I'm going to try this. Okay, yes, I can hear you. Am I coming through?
Yes, you are.
Okay, let me start this again.
Okay.
This first poem is called Rings of Fire. We host our daughter's first birthday party during the hottest April in history. Outside, my dad grills meat over charcoal. Inside, my mom steams rice and roasts vegetables. They've traveled from California, where drought carves trees into tinder. Paradise is burning. When our daughter's first fever, the doctor said it's a sign she's fighting infection. Bloodshed surges with global temperatures, which know no.
Gone again.
Hello, I'm sorry, I keep getting booted off. Can you hear me
Yeah,
now?
can you hear us now?
Yes, let me, perhaps we should move on to the next reader and I'll try to fix my internet connection.
Sure, and I'll put my email in the chat so we can chat if need be, okay? Thanks.
Okay, well,
Okay, thank you. So sorry about that, everybody.
Goes, Richard.
we'll try to get you. We'll try to get you, man. We love you. We want to hear you. Our next reader is Joseph Stroud, who, as Joyce, I think mentioned before, he's going to do a remembrance of Bill Mayer, who was the late poet Bill Mayer, who was a deep friend of the Flash and on the Poetry Flash board. And I hope he's also going to read substantially from his new book, his wonderful new book, Everything That Rises, which is in a series of sections with different kinds of poems in the sections. It begins with a section of 6-line, really little lightning poems and moves to more longer, more ruminative poems, many different forms, and also has a section of translations, which includes, for instance, Catullus, Virgil, I think Neruda, and Chinese poetry. It really, the book as a whole roams the world and it roams history. And it's so clear and expansive, spacious in its poetry, with real moments of kind of a lightning hit, lightning epiphanies. So let's give him a warm welcome, Joseph Stroud.
Thank you, Richard. Can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Oh, okay, good. Let me say just a few words about Bill Mayer. I met Bill about a century ago in the pre-pandemic era. Actually, I met him at a Watershed reading for the first time. Bill studied poetry at San Francisco State in the 60s. One of his teachers was Jack Gilbert, who became one of his mentors, and he became a good friend of Linda Gregg's. And Bill was also a wonderful photographer. He was a wine connoisseur and a lover of classical music. In fact, he has the largest collection of classical music of anyone on the West Coast, except for Peter Weltner. I remember a wonderful couple of weeks in Death Valley with Bill camping together, and every evening as the sun was going down, he would open up a 1985 bottle of Chateau Rochelle, and we would toast the sun going down. So this book is his most recent book, his last book. These poems are written in the last year of his life. I'll just read a couple of them. The first one is The Sequence. It sort of echoes Dante's Divine Comedy opening. The Sequence. In the later part of life, I found myself lost. baffled, and having no idea what to do. All that I thought I knew seemed false. All that I had relied upon, mistaken. I stood as at the entrance of a forest without guides, maps, or GPS. Suddenly, I'd become careful, confused, and full of doubt. My doctor then told me the most important quality I needed for healing was confidence. Who or what could help me now? Who could lead me through my own dark wood? It is true, the trees had become sparser with age and drier. I'd been walking down a steep canyon that had become trailless on the east slope. That put me in the rain shadow. Lodgepole became Jeffrey, Jeffrey became Pinion, and then beyond that, a broad valley of mesquite and ironwood, which strangely became darker, not clearer, as expected, though the sun was high and the air sweet. Everything was as it should be, but nothing was familiar. All was strange, as though I'd been transported to the steppes. Look, I've tried to live my life according to what mattered, against the advice of almost everyone. I had followed what I knew to be true. I'd had masters, been mostly incredibly fortunate. When Jack asked first thing how important poetry was to us, I wrote down some nonsense about how much it mattered, but that I was going to have to live in the real world and get a job and maybe a career. He made me suffer for that, and I've never forgotten it. I took the hard lessons with the easy and never regretted a thing. So now, what was I doing, lost in a great expanse of cacti and the distant, empty hills? Another poem by Bill Mayer. Happiness. I'm waiting in the car while Jane goes into the store to pick up cat litter, because these days I'm not quite strong enough to carry the bags. Listening on the radio to a recording of Mendelssohn's Scottish Symphony, looking out the window and thinking of nothing until without warning, I'm seized by a joy so intense my eyes tear up and I'm shaking. It lasts only for a minute. And then Jane comes back with the bags and we drive home. And the last poem of Bill's that I will read is called The Magnificent Tree. I am in mourning for my fallen tree, the 100-plus-year-old box elder that graced our backyard. With 4 trunks on its own, it made our yard into a forest. Now the critters that made it their home on different levels have packed their bags to find a new one. Soon we will plant new trees or flowers or maybe a vegetable garden. It will be fine, though for now I see the great tree's shadow, tall and proud and alive as ever. The squirrels and woodpeckers busy living their amazing lives. All of us together, partners in the world. So those are some poems from Bill Mayer, and this is his most recent book, his last book. This was written in the last year of his life. I'm going to read a few poems from Shea Creek. Shea Creek is on the east side of the Sierra Nevada. I have a cabin there where for 25 years I've been spending summers and autumns and sometimes into late winter. Its watershed is the Carson River. Shea Creek flows into Hot Springs Creek, which flows into Markleyville Creek, which flows into the East Fork of the Carson, which flows into the Carson Valley Plain, into Nevada, and joins the West Fork of the Carson, and then out into the Great Basin, where it just sort of dissolves out somewhere near Fallon, Nevada. One of the things about a summer day in the Sierra is that it seems to last forever. Lodestone. I lie in a hammock in the slow hours of a summer day. Summer at last in the high country. Summer in the air, in the light, in the poems I'm reading. Poems like deep jade pools of snowmelt under a summer sun. Poems like whorls of agate. There's a drift of pollen through the forest, sifting through the pines and cedars, a fine gold powder drifting like the crushed ash of sunlight. In the seep on the hillside, the first rain orchids appear, the night blue larkspur, leopard lilies. All summer, the seep will blaze with flowers under the flare of sun over the Sierra. The day turns around a single shaft of sunlight through the pines. There's a whisper of water from Shea Creek, like the murmuring of voices from far away. Languorous voices, honey-tongued, voices whispering of summer, of stillness, the slow sound of a heat-drowsed summer noon. A warm wind rises up the canyon, sways the pines. Clouds drift over. If my body were the needle of a compass, it would point dead center into the deep, invisible lodestone of this murmuring, immense summer day. Another poem. These poems are all from the Shea Creek area. Blast. And this is not to be confused with Ezra Pound's magazine. Driving up Poor Boy Road in four-wheel drive, steep grade, rocks and ruts, my old trooper doing what it was made to do. I reach a washout, get out, and walk a mile or so into the forest. Hear a sound, something I can't identify, and come to a meadow, maybe 2 or 3 acres. At its center, a vernal pool. Will be bone dry come summer. But now, sitting in the middle, about 2 feet deep, a black bear, splashing the water around him, having fun, enjoying the day. And I don't care what they say about giving animals human feelings. Call it projection, magical thinking, whatever. This bear, this big cinnamon-colored bear, is having a blast. Someone sent me a YouTube video not too long ago of a bear sitting in their plastic swimming pool, splashing about, having fun, much like that bear. Stacking firewood on the cabin porch. This is for Gary Snyder, little 6-line poem. There are so many important things one can do in this life, but you never see stacking firewood high on the list. Whereas writing poems somehow ranks way up there, worthy of great praise for reasons that are not always clear. But if you've lived through a Sierra winter, you know it wasn't a poem that kept you warm. Fire season. My cabin is at the end of a 6-mile road up a canyon. It's the only way in and the only way out. And Cal Fire people came through a few years ago. We're trying to work out an escape route in case fire came up the canyon, which we did. But his point was that, look, it's not a matter of if a fire is going to happen around here. It's just a matter of when. And the past few years have certainly demonstrated that. For a long time, fire season, the peak season was in August, which is when this poem was written. But over the years, it gradually moved into September, and now it's even into October. Fire season. August, clear morning, a wisp of cloud above Burnside. By noon, it's grown to a thunderhead drifting over the high country. Then maybe a lightning flash along the ridge, a burst of thunder echoing down canyon. Soon there are strikes everywhere. One bolt ignites a dead fir, wind catches the blaze, spreads it, fire moving faster than a man can run. Winds now whipping the flames, limbs so full of pitch the trees explode into a firestorm, the whole canyon on fire, smoke drifting as far south as Mono. Then come the fire teams, hotshots with shovels and chainsaws, helicopters dangling water buckets, bulldozers churning fire breaks, the C-130 banking over the blaze, releasing chemical rain. For days, the forest burns, maybe weeks. Sometimes they'll just let it burn until it burns itself out, until the forest is all char and black ruin, nothing left but scorched granite, the skeletons of trees. August in the high country, looking out from the cabin, watching a cloud build, the air dry and still. Every August, looking up to the ridge toward Burnside, where Thunderhead is now massing and beginning to build. And the last poem is late night, year's end, doing the books with Du Fu. Du Fu was the great Chinese poet from the Tang Dynasty, lived about 1,000 years ago. This poem is in memory of Kenneth Rexroth, who was one of my teachers at San Francisco State. I took a graduate seminar in the arts with Kenneth. Unforgettable. And the poem, the opening of the poem echoes a translation of Rexroth's of a poem by Du Fu. Late night, year's end, doing the books with Du Fu. Ghost fires in the Jade Palace. Moonlight, a scattering of opals on the river. Over us, beasts of the zodiac march across the night. We drink cup after cup of warm rice wine. It's time to take out the ledger, to figure the year's accounts. Du Fu, if our days and nights are the principal, if all the years are interest, then how much do we owe? If I subtract my grief from joy, what is left? Tell me, old friend, how does it balance? In one of your last poems, you talk about the stars outside your hut, how impossible to count them. There are no numbers, you say, for this life. Who cares if we're in the red or the black? Add a few zeros and we're rich. Erase a few and we're poor. You're right, Du Fu. Rich or poor, the night, each night burgeons within us. The mornings open with sunlight. Why count them? Instead of numbers, let me enter words into the ledger. This account of our friendship, this little poem from me to you across the glimmering, innumerable years. Thank you. Pleasure to be at this reading, even though I see nobody.
Okay, thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you for your remembrance of our dear friend Bill, and thank you for your own beautiful work. I think that I think that we're going to get our man Craig back up here. I'm hoping we can do that. So let's see what's going to shake out. Let's hope for the best.
And if
Yes, can you hear me all right now?
we can, I was hoping, hi guys, this is Brett. I was hoping that if we could turn off our videos, it might be supporting with the connection since Craig is coming from Hawaii. If you don't know how to do that, basically on the bottom right, you can click your video off, and that should, like the people said in the chat, help with the connection. And then what we'll do is done as soon as Craig is done reading, we can bring our videos back. So if you could turn off your video, let's see if this helps. Bottom left, right by your microphones. And Craig, let's go round two. Let's do this.
All right. Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. Again, I'm honored to be a part of this event and loved hearing Lucille, Kristen, and Joe read those amazing poems. I'm going to read some poems from my new book, Habitat Threshold. This first poem, again, is titled Rings of Fire. We host our daughter's first birthday party during the hottest April in history. Outside, my dad grills meat over charcoal. Inside, my mom steams rice and roasts vegetables. They've traveled from California, where drought carves trees into tinder. Paradise is burning. When our daughter's first fever spiked, the doctor said it's a sign she's fighting infection. Bloodshed surges with global temperatures which know no borders. If her fever doesn't break, the doctor continued, take her to the emergency room. Airstrikes detonate hospitals in Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan, South Sudan. When she crowned, my wife said, it felt like rings of fire. Volcanoes erupt along Pacific fault lines. Sweltering heat waves scorch Australia. Forests in Indonesia are razed for palm oil plantations. Their ashes flock like ghost birds to our distant rib cages. Still, I crave an unfiltered cigarette, even though I quit years ago, and my breath no longer smells like my grandpa's overflowing ashtray. His parched cough still punctures the black lungs of cancer and denial. If she struggles to breathe, the doctor advised, give her an asthma inhaler. But tonight, we sing happy birthday and blow out the candles together. Smoke trembles as if we all exhaled the same flammable wish. Okay, this second poem takes place at the Waikiki Aquarium, which is one of my daughter's favorite places. It's called A Sonnet at the Edge of the Reef. We dip our hands into the outdoor reef exhibit and touch sea cucumber and red urchin as butterfly fish swim by. The Dawson explains, once a year after the full moon, when tides swell to a certain height and salt water reaches the perfect temperature, only then will the ocean cue coral polyps to spawn in synchrony a galaxy of gametes, which dances to the surface, fertilizes, opens, forms larvae, roots to seafloor, and grows generation upon generation. At home, we read a children's book, The Great Barrier Reef, to our daughter snuggling between us in bed. We don't mention corals bleaching, reared in labs or frozen. And isn't our silence, too, a kind of shelter? Okay, the next poem is titled The Last Safe Habitat. and it's dedicated to a native Hawaiian bird called the Kauai-o-o, whose song was last heard here in the islands in 1987. I don't want our daughter to know that Hawaii is the bird extinction capital of the world. I don't want her to walk around the island feeling haunted by tree roots buried under concrete. I don't want her to fear the invasive predators who slither, pounce, bite, swallow, disease, and multiply. I don't want her to see paintings and photographs of birds she'll never witness in the wild. I don't want her to imagine their bones in dark museum drawers. I don't want her to hear their voice recordings on the internet. I don't want her to memorize and recite the names of 77 lost species and subspecies for a school project. I don't want her to draw a timeline with the years each was first collected and last sighted. I don't want her to learn about the Kauai-o-o, who was observed atop a flowering ohia tree, calling for a mate, day after day, season after season, because he didn't know he was the last of his kind. Until one day, he disappeared forever into a nest of avian silence. I don't want our daughter to calculate how many miles of fencing is needed to protect the endangered birds that remain. I don't want her to realize the most serious causes of extinction can't be fenced out. I want to convince her that extinction is not the end. I want to convince her that extinction is just a migration to the last safe habitat on Earth. I want to convince her that our winged relatives have arrived safely to their destination, a wondrous island with a climate we can never change, and a rainforest fertile with seeds and song. Okay, this last poem is called Chanting the Waters. And it's a call and response poem. So I'm gonna see if Richard and Joyce can unmute themselves and help me with this poem. Is that possible, you two? Are you there?
Yes.
Awesome, okay.
Yes.
All right, so this poem, Chanting the Waters, was written as a solidarity poem for Standing Rock a few years ago. It's dedicated to water protectors around the world, and it kind of interweaves water struggles on Turtle Island here in the Pacific and globally. So your part, Richard and Joyce, when I say, you have to say water is life. And everyone else, you can play along if you like. Okay, chanting the waters. Say,
Water is life.
because our bodies are 60% water, because my wife labored for 24 hours through contracting waves, because water breaks forth from shifting tectonic plates. Say,
Water is life.
because amniotic fluid is 90% water, because she breathed and breathed and breathed, because our lungs are 80% water, because our daughter crowned like a new island. Say,
Water is life.
because we tell creation stories about water, because our language flows from water, because our words are islands writ on water, because it takes more than 3 gallons of water to make a single sheet of paper. Say,
Water is life.
because water is the next oil, because 180,000 miles of US oil pipelines leak every day, because we wage war over gods and water and oil. Say,
Water is life.
because our planet is 70% water, because only 3% of global water is fresh, because it takes 2 gallons of water to refine 1 gallon of gasoline, because it takes 20 gallons of water to make a pound of plastic, because the average American water footprint is 2,000 gallons a day. Say,
Water is life.
because 1 billion people lack access to drinking water, because women and children walk 4 miles every day to gather clean water and deliver it home. Say,
Water
is
is life.
Because our bones are 30% water. Because if you lose 5% of your body's water, you become feverish. If you lose 10% of your body's water, you become immobile. Because our bodies won't survive a week without water, say.
Water
is life.
Because corporations privatize, dam, and bottle our waters. Because plantations divert our waters. Because animal slaughterhouses consume our waters. Because pesticides, chemicals, lead, and waste poison our waters, say.
Water is life.
life.
Because they bring their bulldozers and drills and drones. Because we bring our feathers and lei and sage and shells and canoes and hashtags and totems. Because they call us savage and primitive and riot. Because we bring our treaties and the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Because they bring their banks and politicians and dogs and paychecks and pepper spray and bullets. Because we bring our songs and schools and prayers and chants and ceremonies. Because we say, stop, keep the oil in the ground. Because they say, shut up and vanish. Because we are not moving. Because they bring their police and private militia. Because we bring all our relations and all our generations and all our live streams. Say,
Water is life.
because our drumming sounds like rain after drought echoing against taut skin. Because our skin is 60% water. Say,
Water is life.
because every year millions of children die from waterborne diseases. Because every day thousands of children die from waterborne diseases. Because by the end of this poem, 5 children will die from waterborne diseases. Say,
Water
is life.
because my daughter loves playing in the ocean. Because someday she'll ask, where does the ocean end? Because we'll point to the dilating horizon. Say,
Water is life.
because our eyes are 95% water. Because we'll tell her ocean has no end. Because sky and clouds lift ocean. Because mountains embrace ocean into blessings of rain. Because ocean, sky, rain fills aquifers and lakes. Because ocean, sky, rain, lake flows into the Missouri River. Because ocean, sky, rain, lake, river returns to the Pacific and connects us to our cousins at Standing Rock. Because our blood is 90% water. Say,
Water is
life.
because our hearts are 75% water. Because I'll teach her our people's word for water, Hanum, Hanum, Hanum. So the sound of water will always carry her home. Say,
Water
is life.
say,
Water is life.
say one more time.
Water is life.
life.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Joyce and Richard and everyone who participated. Mahalo.
I
Okay.
have one little thing to say, everyone. Please, you can turn your videos back on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Craig. I'm sorry for we're trying to power through, and Brett is wonderful in helping us. And I'm sure everyone will agree that Craig was worth the wait. So thank you. Okay, there can be no more fitting way to wind up this 25th anniversary reading than with the iconic Northern California couple, Brenda Hillman and Bob Hass. So here they're gonna come, and first will be Brenda. Now she's going to be, what she's going to read is completely up to Brenda, but we're celebrating here her most recent book, Extra Hidden Life Among the Days. Now, Brenda all of whose books I've read, was always, I think, an extraordinary poet. But she began, you could classify insofar as all that stuff matters, as a mainstream American poet. Then somewhere towards the middle of her career, she became pals with various language poets, Lynn Heginian and others. And then her language took on an extraordinary freedom in space and in sound. And so I think that's very important to know about her work. Now, this book, Extra Hidden, one more thing I want to say, if you'll put up with my babbling. She has, throughout her career, been in touch with her kid self, that fertile kid self, so that, for instance, in this newest book with 2 elegies for her father and for the wonderful poet C.D. Wright, even there, her poetry is illumined by a kind of a radiant play. So here she comes. Let's give her a warm welcome. Brenda Hillman.
Thank you, Richie. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I have, let's see, I'm not sure what to do here.
You can just start reading, Brenda.
Okay, okay. I just, I'm seeing Richard and I'm seeing a row of people. Anyway, I want to thank all the readers, amazing readings, and it's a complete honor to read with my beloved. Richard, I'm not going to read too much from the new book. I'm going to read some new poems, a couple of older poems, but if you want to make a request, I will accommodate. Just put it in the chat or something. I want to dedicate the reading to Joyce and Richard and Mark Baldridge. Just great people, and just say this is for them, and to acknowledge the fact that I'm reading on Chochenyo Ohlone land, and I wrote the poems on that land as well. Everything okay? Yeah, okay. I'm working on a new book that's maybe 3/4 finished. And so I'll read the first poem in that book. Slightly less stressful walk uphill. How do you hope to survive? And not just that, was it even the question? By midday, the fog was burning off. Screech and call beside the anyway, the parent osprey had gone out looking for the right fish. Did it fear stone? And bryophytes rested on the soil as the soul might rest on the what-ifs. You were trying not to waste poetry's time on stupid questions. All the yous going along out there, tired, getting through meetings, never enough sleep even if you nap at the office, checking the phone, tiny electrons of joy, messages from large specific you, small specific you, large general you, pressure-filled colleagues whose healing had not occurred but still might. Tech certainly hadn't helped, chlorpyrifos, cities eking out funds, people sleeping in tents with black and white dogs and children, racist prisons, you're getting numb to the list, growth in the service sector, women working 3 jobs, production of power, and that tone in the prophet voices when you call customer service growing slightly more officious, suspecting the next downturn. You wake with nano minutes of stress built up overnight, offshore breezes, fear of fires, mosses bunched near the small oaks. Did they fear stone? Women had experimented for centuries with too much cortisol. So what to do now, since doing was the problem? It was just mainly important to get through the day with the minutes moving roundly rather than lengthwise. Surely one note could be singled out. For example, the screech of the baby osprey and the nest waiting, heavy with proudlings. Perhaps a calm could be entered like cooked fog, or a monarch butterfly coming out looking like John Clare across the enclosures. On the other side of the highway, steel tubes of dairy trucks were grinding along and milk sloshing inside, and besides that, the hope of the circular spirits bringing a map of formless order where a legendary love was taking place beyond control. I'm really interested in stress, actually, as a state, but also how we're all handling it. Not just obviously one kind of stress, but a lot of different stresses. And now this new kind of strange. So we're all doing this kind of physical lab experiment, I think, that's interesting to track in poetry. And I love that poets are taking charge of things in the interior world. Winter Song for One Who Suffers. This poem was in the New Yorker, and I got a lot of mail about it, as one gets if you have a venue like that. And people kept writing, oh, you got the COVID just right. And this was actually written before COVID. I was thinking about Matsada and the Jewish diaspora, and also about a friend who had really suffered. Winter Song for One Who Suffers. The stars stand up behind the day. A known dove balances on its claw at the window. A cosmic incident of darkness has begun, and a mild excess of beauty will be offered to the dead, which they will eat. On a hill, the wise man serves the people. Your thought splits in half when he speaks of the old revolts, the return of apocalypse, motive and advancement. A soul can crouch a long time while the heart expands to reach its edges. What is missing past the glitter of the harvest? Friend, you chose to live. How? You did. So many choices, not just 2, encrypted behind the mystery of the sun. Then the hurt was set aside. Indeterminate chaos called in by love. And these next two poems actually have been written in the COVID lockdown sequester. And Bob and I took a course on the Book of Revelation, which is a really peculiar piece of literature. But anyway, I was very interested in all the lists and the catalogs and everything in it. And I decided in these poems to start tracking my breath with little, I'm gonna hold it up. I put these little circles in my poems that I drew on my iPad. They're little breath circles. Little breath circles across town. I thought I saw a man bent over, but it was a road sign. I thought I heard deploying data management systems, but it was just sounds in the mind. Dr. L woke early, breathed, and put on a blue sheath. Dr. M woke on Earth, logged in, and counted a fringe flight of numbers. Some woke old and alone, and when they died, they were ours. Unprecedented was our word. C closed the shop and the books read to each other, as we have written, the data-driven. The yellow dress left at the laundry recalled its one body, and the single lemon on a branch hung like a Wednesday. Radiance, what is your intention? We lit a single candle, not 12, and the world soul floated over the bored children with their handhelds and the adults with their own beasts and their own apocalypse, while the sickness passed by, going the other way in a yearning chorus of fragments. Intention, what is your intention? Wasn't there meaning among the jeweled threads? You can buy the RNA sequencing kit online for $4,000 US. We could hear the great dead with fires far off. We could hear the ones we love, the singing flame. Stayed busy inside the moments of not. Stayed busy inside the moments of not touching. Irregular chirping in the rosebush, a tiny broken coffee maker, maybe a towhee. Plane sat idle. Please let's stop calling them birds. Rat, owl, fox, newt, raccoon, squirrel, bee, finch, skunk, flea. Each family had its own beast. Blue skies returned to Los Angeles. Water recovered. The moon forevered. Roses stared in at us as if yearning. Belief is not irrelevant to this. Silence of the violence, what we were made of, weeks into it, changed little, though more people were cleaning their own houses. There's still time for the moth of history to fly through snow stars falling from events we remember clearly, standing under the magic and tragic blooming of proximate trees in our centuries, Beijing, Berkeley, Berlin, the apex of blossoms and the ache of our love, beneath them, inside, each silence, the being of numbers, breathing with us until we nearly could not bear the immensity, but we had to. Inside, longer numbers, right to the edge of their suffering. And before, so this is also in the new book, before everything obviously closed down, I was taking my students out sometimes to do actions in very odd places. I think poetry can be taken outdoors, and obviously now we can't do much activism of that kind, but poetry can be taken outdoors to do little acts of odd rebellion, where you just read poems in places that seem disturbing, like, you know, in a shopping center or something. So this is about one of those actions, and it has little photos embedded in it. And also I used a text corruptor to black out some of the words. So some of the words are blacked out. Report on another encounter in nature. After the EPA, this is when Trump, of course, was just starting. After the EPA began to unravel, some students and I decided to read what used to be called nature poetry at a shopping center, wearing Russian gas masks we had purchased on the internet. The students were brave and jaunty. We were surrounded by grassy hills with so-called invasive species. We were augmented by a little buzzing from the edge of the universe. We felt everything intensely. Phrases sliced through the minutes, then moved away through space. At the Safeway, a man came up to us, older white guy, and asked what we were doing there. I said we were reading nature poetry outdoors because of what was happening to the EPA. He said we would have to take our protest elsewhere. I said we were here as part of an ecology class. He said he owned the Safeway and we would have to leave. I looked at his Volvo, its gas tank full of screaming dead animals from the Cretaceous, a warm geologic period of shallow inland seas, a phrase I've always found comforting. Not sure what to do with line endings here. If you are writing prose poetry as a unit in your creative writing class, please do not imitate me. We moved our reading a few yards away to non-dirty Western dirt full of not yet extracted minerals and secret water I pray to. Poetry can bring odd thoughts outdoors. We moved to another town and read there. The rubber tubes of our gas masks looked like the snouts of ancient anteaters dangling down over the pages, or phones without being connected to anything. At first, it was hard to see the poems through the scratched eye goggles, and then we got the hang of it. We wondered how the gas masks had been used before. Just practice or what, since they were sold on the internet for $10 each. What happened to our interlocutor? How will he live out his days without poetry, with his features congested by fumes? If I knew his name, I could place it here instead of this text corrupter. Instead, I will place a little spell. We will not meet him again on this earth. We will not meet him on in the stars of hell. We will not meet him in the place unseen. We will not meet him in a wishing well. There are books and beauty where we dwell. We will love each other in the dream. And I'm going to read 2 more poems, just because Richie mentioned this, this book, which is Extra Hidden Life Among the Days. So Richie, do you have a request? I'll just pick one. All right, let's see. I'll pick. This is a poem for you poets out there. It's kind of an ars poetica for me. I guess it's I think of it as kind of an ars poetica. It's called The Bride Tree Can't Be Read, but I have to find it. It's really about a plum tree near Bob's in my house, but I made it into a sort of symbolist explosion of beauty in this poem. The bride tree can't be read. The bride tree puts down its roots below the phyla. It is there when we die and when we are born, middle and upper branches reaching the planet heart by the billions during the revolution we don't see. Quarks and leptons are cooling on their infant stems, spinning the spinning brain of matter, fled to electrical dark water, species with names the tree can hold in the shale shade brought by the ambulance of art. No one but you knows what occurred in the dress you wore in the dream of atonement, that displaced tree in the dream you wore, a suffering endurable only once, edges that sought release from envy to a more endurable loss, a form to be walked past that has outworn the shame of time, its colors sprung through description above a blaze of rhizomes, spreading in an arable mat that mostly isn't simple, but is calm and free. So I'll read one more poem from a book called Practical Water. And as Richie mentioned, I've been really rangy all my life as a poet, kind of gone a very big stylistic range. And I worked for 20 years on books of poems about the Earth's elements, and there are 4 of them. And now I'm working on 4 books about time, and I'm in the 3rd book. So that's my secret that I'm confessing here on the internet. Joyce printed this one time on a broadside, and I've read it several times at Watershed, but I wanted to read it again and dedicate it to Joyce. It's called Practical Water. And I did want to say to you that even though we have Biden, it doesn't mean we can stop working. We have to just keep working and work our asses off, actually, harder than ever. Keep the pressure on. So thank you for your attention, and I can't wait to hear my beloved read. about Barry. Practical water. What does it mean to live a moral life? It is nearly impossible to think about this. We went down to the creek. The sides were filled with tiny watery activities. The mind was split and mended, each perception divided into more, and there were in the hearts of the water molecules little branches perpendicular to thought. Had lobbied the Congress, but it was dead. Had written to the Committee on Understanding. Had written to the middle of the middle class, but it was drinking. Had voted in cafes with shoplifters and beekeepers stirring tea made of water hitched to the green ark. And ethics occurs at the edge of what we know. The creek goes underground about here. The spirits offer us a world of origins. Owl takes its call from the drawer of the sky. Unusually warm global warming day out. A tiny droplet shines on a leaf, and there your creek is found. It has borrowed something to link itself to others. We carry ourselves through the days in code, DNA like Raskolnikov's staircase, neither good nor bad in itself. Lower frequencies are the mind. What happened to the creek is what happened to the sentence in the 20th century. It got social underground. You should make yourself uncomfortable. If not you, who? Thrush comes out from the cottony coyote bush, clink a clink, drink, churr, turns a golden eyebrow to the ground. We run past the plant that smells like taco sauce. Recite words for water, viter, vater, vitar, voten, voten, voda. Insert all languages here. Poor Rimbaud didn't know how to live, but he knew how to act. Red-legged frog in the pond sounds like him. Uncomfortable and say a spell. Blossom knit and heel affix. Fiddle fern in the neck of the sun. It's hard to be water, to fall from faucets with fangs, to lie under trawlers as horizons, but you must. Your species can't say it. You have to do spells and tag them. Uncomfortable and act like you mean it. Go to the world. Where is it? Go there. Thank you.
Okay, Brenda, thank you so much. One of the things, the many things that I didn't say, that you could hear from what she's just said and read, Brenda is an activist. She is an activist, and we all have to listen and follow her lead. Okay, then. Thank you again. Now here comes Bob. Bob is, I'm hoping he's going to read from his own work substantially too, but he's going to remember and celebrate Barry Lopez, the environmentalist and writer. His newest book, Bob's newest book, Summer Snow, is of course an extraordinary book. Now, let me just repeat what you've heard many times. Watershed was basically Bob's idea from when he was a U.S. laureate, U.S. poet laureate, 95 to 97. And he was reading Gary Snyder's A Place in Space, which is, among other things, talking about the bioregions that are defined by watersheds. Now, you know, it's very hard to talk about anyone's poetry, especially an extraordinary poet, because the poetry is of course a mystery. But among a few obvious things I want to say, Bob has stuck with with English. But my Bronx people used to say, do you speak English? He's stuck with the language as it has been given to us through history and its grammar. And one thing that occurs to me, not for the first time in reading this new book, especially there's an extraordinary long poem here called An Argument About Poetics, imagined at Squaw Valley after a night walk under the mountain. And he's talking in imagination with Czeslaw Miłosz. And what I want to say about the poem is that Bob's work throughout his career, and maybe especially in this book, he's attracted to complexity. And I think that that's because if you've got the mind for it, complexity offers the richest solutions. And Summer Snow is full of so many rich, rich solutions. So let's welcome him, Watershed Daddy Bob Hass.
Thanks, Richard, so much. Am I up? No, I can't tell if I'm up. Yeah. So, Joyce, thank you so much. 25 years, Richard and Joyce have been making this happen, and with them, Mark Baldridge, who is like this, for me, the spirit wings hovering behind this event. It was really wonderful to hear Lucille and Kristen and Craig and Joe, and through Joe, Bill and Brenda. Very moving, incredibly moving. The first Watershed conference 25 years ago was sponsored partly by International Rivers, which is an organization, and it wouldn't have happened without their support at the time. International Rivers is located in Berkeley, but their work is protecting living rivers all over the world, and particularly protecting indigenous peoples from monstrous culture-destroying dam projects, which are still happening all over the world. I thought when we were listening to Craig's gorgeous poem about water that if you have not visited the website of International Rivers, you should. They do a great job around the world, and even $10 a year would help them a lot. One of the other sponsors of the first Watershed event was Orion Magazine. And Orion, and one of the first readers at the first Watershed was Barry Lopez, who died on Christmas Day. And Orion asked me to write something, ask a bunch of people to write something about their memories of Barry, who was a wonderful warrior for the species on the earth and for the indigenous peoples who are being crowded out by human development. Anyway, here's what I'm going to do is honor Barry at the end by reading a little of this. Glimpses of Barry Lopez. When I heard that he had died, an immediate visual image came to my mind. Barry and Dick Nelson had both spent a lot of time among native peoples in Alaska. Barry for Arctic Dreams, and Dick for Hunters of the Northern Forest and Hunters of the Northern Ice. And they were talking about the potential awkwardness of being observers and outsiders to the cultures they were trying to learn, which must be a professional problem for both anthropologists and journalists. And Dick said, you need to learn how to hang out. It's an attitude toward time. You can study people in the culture who know how to do it, which we mostly don't. And I asked, so what did you learn? And Barry squared his shoulders, slid a hand into each pocket of his jeans up to the knuckles, his palms flat against his thighs, in a perfect physical embodiment of just hanging out. And then he raised his eyebrows just a little, poker-faced, faintly raised them, as if to say, hey, I'm here, don't have a program, open to possibilities. And Dick laughed and said, exactly. I had trouble with this sentence describing Barry's physical attitude, and as I was trying to write it, I thought Barry would have nailed this. He was, painful to be using the past tense, a gorgeous maker of sentences. And I think it had to do with his Jesuit education, that he had a moral language in which he always talked about writing. I've heard him speak of the integrity of a sentence. Here is what he told me about how he began as a writer. Such a good story, it might not be strictly true. He spoke about story in the same way that he spoke about the sentence. When he finished his master's degree at Notre Dame, he said, he moved to Oregon and rented a cabin in the woods with the intention of becoming a writer. The year must have been 1968. It was just before the emergence of graduate programs in creative writing at universities. In those days, every drugstore had a magazine rack, and they always contained a magazine called Writer's Digest, which printed tips for writers and lists of markets for magazine articles, potential ideas for articles, expected word lengths, and often how much they paid per word. So Barry bought a copy in his new town while he was getting in groceries and went back to his cabin, unpacked and stored the groceries, and began to read. Water for the cabin was supplied by a well and a pump, and very soon the pump ceased to function. Barry took the pump into town, and a guy in the hardware store showed him the stock of pumps and explained the pros and cons of each type very helpfully, very clearly. And Barry went home and wrote an article on how to buy a water pump and scanned Writer's Digest and sent the piece to a magazine called Popular Mechanics, which could also be found in the drugstore rack. And Popular Mechanics took the piece and paid him $50, and he was in business. Another occasion, a summer day in Sitka. Dick Nelson is taking us out to St. Lazaria in his Boston whaler. St. Lazaria is an island, an old eroded volcano, about 18 miles out from Sitka Harbor, facing onto the Pacific, a nesting place for northern birds and one of the wonders of the earth. I think it can no longer be visited on foot. It's so dense in summer with bird life, but Dick had managed to get permission to go ashore and talk to us on the way about what we were going to see. Colonies of thick-billed murres, the duck-sized black and white birds that fill in Alaskan waters the ecological niche filled by penguins in the Antarctic, brilliant clown-faced tufted puffins, and smaller birds, pigeon guillemots and rhinoceros auklets. The trip there in summer is itself an amazement. Bagdanov Island rising steeply out of the sea, rafts of sea otters in the kelp beds around smaller islands, and sea lions sunning on the rocky shores, bald eagles soaring overhead, humpback whales breaching and blowing. We had binoculars. We're taking in as much as we could and occasionally just looked at each other, shaking our heads in wonder. Dick got us ashore, which was a bit tricky, but we scrambled up a stair-like rise in the basalt, and as many as 75,000 birds, I have read, bred on the island at a given time in season, and suddenly we were in the middle of it. One walked cautiously. Dick had it in mind to show Barry a chocolate-colored lily endemic to the island. We almost gawked at the teeming life. We mostly gawked at the teeming life. There were birds I felt I had never seen before, seen at a distance. The racket of bird cries was intense. And we were decidedly in their living quarters. The racket of bird cries, I'm missing my line. The racket of bird cries was intense, and over a small rise, we saw the source of it. In one crevice of rock, perched in its nest, was a fledgling bald eagle, and it was driving the other birds crazy to have this predator in their midst, especially the puffins and the storm petrels and the gulls, glaucous-winged gulls with silvery mantles. They were harrying the young eagle relentlessly, dive-bombing toward its nest, veering away and coming back and dive-bombing and calling out sharply. The eagle seemed to ignore them. It kept hunching its shoulders as if it were contemplating the idea of flying. It had never occurred to me what the young at the top of the food chain had to endure growing up. Barry said later, when we were heading back to town and saw those powerful birds commanding the air overhead, that it was as if to be a prince, you got sent to one of those awful English boarding schools that specialized in hazing the young. But at that moment on the island, we were just taking in the spectacle. It is another visual memory I have of him, Barry on a ledge of volcanic rock, raising both fists in the air and pumping them, as if to say, if this isn't the heart of life, what is? The last time we talked at any length, we talked into the night drinking wine. It was during the time when he was finishing his work on Home Ground. He'd been doing a series of readings and he seemed tired and a little strung out. And I had the sense that Barry's feeling for what he was trying to do in Home Ground burned in him like a fever. I think he must have been trying to talk out the ideas in the introduction he needed to write for the book. He and his partner, Deborah Guantry, had conceived the book along with the editor at Trinity University Press, Barbara Rass. The idea was to get a couple dozen writers from all over the continent to compose a dictionary of words used to describe the North American earth. I had a small hand in it, so I'm not entirely disinterested, but I do think it's one of the most delicious books I know about the English language and about American geography. Honor was another word Barry liked to use. Honor as a verb, or as a verb that he felt urgently needed to be turned into a noun. He thought that he and Deborah were assembling a record of the way that language honors the land by representing over time the exactness and immense variety of the human attempts to name what we see. He wanted to believe that honoring the land would draw honor out of us and our behaviors. That night, as he talked, his impulse seemed to me messianic. It was a lot to ask of words and the way we use them, but it was part of Barry's discipline and self-discipline as a writer to ask it. And it is part of what I admire so much about his work. It mattered to him intensely, the difference between a wharf and a pier, between an animal's den and its lair. And he was inclined to think that for humans, the welfare of the earth depended on seeing clearly enough to honor those distinctions in the way that the distinctions themselves were ways of seeing and honoring the earth. You sense it in his prose. Here's the sentence from an essay from 1984. I slow the car, downshifting from fourth to third, with the melancholic notes of Bach's Sixth Cello Suite in my ears, a recording of Casals from 1936, and turn east away from the volcanic ridge of black basalt. This is the beginning of The Reflection of Snow Geese, an essay about his time in the Tule Lake National Wildlife Refuge on the California-Oregon border. The refuge is one of the places on the Pacific Flyway to see migrating birds by the thousands: snow geese, Ross's geese, Canada geese, whistling swans. and hundreds of thousands of ducks in immense flocks, mallards, gadwalls, pintails, lesser scaups, cinnamon teal, blue-winged teal, golden eyes, wheels and wheels of them rising out of the marsh at dawn or settling into it at dusk. And the essay is the place to see Barry at work, downshifting. The first word in his essay is a typical move, a recommendation to slow down and pay attention. And naming the exact version of the Bach cello suite is a Barry move. Something passionate about the species, someone passionate about the species on Earth was also passionate about being specific. The movement of the essay belongs to the genre of nature writing he had taught himself. First the wonder, then the science, and then in his work, this is where the cello suite returns as an ecological theme, an implicit argument that the fusion of beauty and science in what we are seeing ought to draw out of us a kind of moral wonder. I just looked again to see how he does it in this essay. Listen to this. What a visitor finds startling in the great synchronicity of their movements, long skeins of white unfurl brilliantly against blue skies and dark cumulonimbus thunderheads riding the towering wash of winds. They rise from the water or fall from the sky, the birds with balletic grace, with a booming voice like rattle sheets of corrugated tin, with a furious and unmitigated energy, is the life of them that takes such hold on you. Out of curiosity, do I have time for this? Yeah. Out of curiosity, I looked to see when Barry was assembling this dictionary of language for the American landscape, what words he assigned to himself to write on. Here's the list. Acrefoot, Blind Creek, ice volcano, desert, mudslide, pitch, refugium, sand, scarp, shinnery, soil, strike valley. I wondered why he had given himself a word like sand and what he would do with it. He begins with the definition. Definitions always look a lot easier than they are. Here's his definition of sand. Loose aggregates of mineral grains, mostly quartz, created by geological forces that include plate tectonics and erosion. The next sentence is classic Lopez. Wind and water sort this hard detritus so efficiently into masses of life-size particles that we are able to speak of a sand bar as distinct from a gravel bar, and other discrete form, such as a mud flat, which is made up of same size particles of clay or silt. This morning, I think about the fever of the cancer that took him and the fire that burned through his property just months before his death, and about the cool and clarity of the landscapes and the habits of mind he was drawn to and gave to us. There was a mix in him of fire and ice that is going to continue to be his gift to us. It's Barry Lopez, one of the two Larry spirits of the last 25 years of our American writing about the continent, along with Lucille, Craig, Brenda, Kristen, watching the young come along, thinking about Joe Stroud taking a class from Kenneth Rexroth, 50 years ago, Joe? 50 years ago, 40 years ago. Bill Meyer taking a class from Jack Gilbert. Think of those other faces from the photographs, Joanne Kiker and Jane Hirschfield, the writers of this place. we've been very lucky and deeply lucky for Joyce and Richard for their way of taking care of us for these 25 years. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Bob. Absolutely, totally, man. And thanks to all the readers, everyone, all the viewers, everyone who's helped us to round out this quarter century. Thank you all deeply. Here comes Joyce. She's gonna thank you and wind up.
Hello, hi. I just wanted to thank you for all of that. And Bob, there wasn't anything else you wanted to say, right? That was so beautiful. I just thank you all from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for joining us at this 25th annual Watershed Environmental Poetry Festival. Like Brenda said, we have a lot more work to do, and we need to do it for the earth, and as Nancy Pelosi says, for the children, for writers, nature, and community, which has always been our motto here at Watershed. See our Watershed online bookshop. Books by all of our presenters this entire weekend are there. It's courtesy of Pegasus Books in Berkeley. That's at bookshop.org/shop/watershed. And if you lose track of that, go to poetryflash.org to the Watershed page, and you'll find that link there. You'll also find info about the gorgeous Ellery Akers hand printed poem broadside that we made. Just gorgeous. Lisa Rappaport, Literal Press. It's a gorgeous piece, and it says what we need to say about this time. And I also wanted to say that the photographs and music that hopefully, I know you didn't get to hear all of the music. Hopefully you saw the photographs, but we are going to fix that up and post all of the Watershed events on the new Poetry Flash YouTube channel. So hang on, and they will be coming to the Poetry Flash YouTube channel. And let's see, I think I just wanted to read Ellery Akers' poem as kind of a closer, and just to let you know that this is what Watershed is about. Lesions. Thank you, Ellery. Whenever a species gets stubbed out like this, I feel the border of our lives is fraying. The map of the sea yanked blank in one corner. Sometimes I think we're holding the diameter of the earth in our hands, an elastic band stretched tight, and we're living in the years before it snaps back and tosses animals and trees and us away. Maybe we should write a letter to those people of the future. Here is the earth. Love it for us. It's hard to believe, but we loved it too. So from Poetry Flash in Berkeley, we're signing off and sending love out. Thank you.